So tonight we are here with Mark Peters, talking leadership. Mark is the CEO of Butterball Farms, and it's nationally recognized as one of the best and brightest companies to work for. The second generation family business is based here in West Michigan and is America's leading producer of culinary butter and margarine and creates custom butter flavors for some of America's biggest brands. But Peters began as a factory worker in his father's company at the age of 12, an experience that taught him firsthand about the challenges that frontline workers face. And at 30, he took over the company, determined to lead a financially successful business that would enrich the lives of its workers. And then I'm going to fast forward to today. The West Michigan-based model that he has made has been replicated in nearly 10 states, and he's currently expanding his mission to help frontline workers not only maintain jobs, but progress into better positions within or across partner companies. He's recognized by numerous companies from Ernst & Young to McDonald's for his leadership, and he's an engaging speaker, storyteller, and he's addressed the TEDx audiences. He lives here in West Michigan with his daughter and his dog. He's an avid diver, boater, biker, and skier. Welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Samantha, for the invitation. Super happy to be here. Super happy to be with Schuler. So looking forward to it.
This is awesome. So let's just jump right in. Why don't you give us an idea of what made you want to write the source?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. And it's, I tell people I'm a lifelong learner. And so I think like a lot of people, I have my mentors, and I have one in particular who I always tell him he's a bit of a protagonist for me. And he first challenged me to do some public speaking. And I was like, oh, okay, you can kind of do that. He goes, well, it doesn't count until you get paid for it. So I did manage to get a keynote speech presentation put together that I would give to family business groups around the country. And I got legitimately paid. And he's like, okay, that's great. Now you should write a book. And I'm like, Greg, what am I going to write a book about? And probably a year after that, we were sitting around having dinner and we were talking about the source. And I was telling him what we were doing. And he's like, I think that's your book. I'm like, Greg, and I stopped mid-sentence. I'm like, actually, you know what? I could write a book on that. That's a crazy story. I mean, and so that was the beginning. And I knew nothing about writing a book. And so it's been an entire learning experience, but sort of the why behind it, I guess maybe that's the how. The why behind it is, I have a small company and we've got about 130 to 150 employees. And so we can have a certain amount of impact, and then with the source, I think we've got over 8,000 employees are covered by the source. But it was a way to sort of expand what we've done and get some knowledge out in the marketplace about what we've done. Because I think a lot of employers want to do this kind of thing, but they don't have a roadmap. And it seems like a really big thing to do. And the fact that we've got almost 20 years of experience with this model now, I think we can take some of the fear and fast track some of the learning for people who might be interested in doing similar kinds of things in their workplaces. So that's really the why. It's to sort of demystify and take the fear out of, trying this stuff.
That's wonderful. And how do you, I guess I don't want to give away too much of what's in the book, but how is the book set up? Let's talk about that. You talk about it as a roadmap. So is it different sections? What can people expect to see when they open that book?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's probably more accurately, it's my roadmap. So I think what you get when you read the book is this was a journey. I mean, you sort of get these pictures into this learning, this journey over a number of years and what became the source. And some of my ahas along the way that led to the creation of the source. And I think a lot of people share some of those, whether it's sort of clicked with them yet or not. So there's there's quite a bit of my personal story woven into it, because I think it resonates with a lot of people. And I think that sort of came out of the speaking I did with the family business groups. A lot of times when you're running a business, you feel like, am I the only one that thinks this way? Doesn't anybody? And you feel sometimes quite alone. And so what I got in doing that speaking was people would come up to me and they would say, my dad, they would say, that's my uncle, that's my grandmother, that's my cousin, and so there's a common thread, I think, that runs through most of our lives. And from people that have read the book, what I keep hearing is very authentic, completely resonated with me, and really inspired me to think about things differently. So
That's great. And then you mentioned some of those aha moments. So looking back, what was kind of the turning point to creating this model?
So
any
that's
good stories?
Yeah, there's some of those stories are in the book. And it's not like there was like one thing that happened and I said, oh, we've got to do this. It was this desire to run a business in a different way than my father had. And sort of that story is kind of in the book. And coming to the realization that I talk about Cascade Engineering, Fred Keller and Cascade Engineering. Fred's been a big mentor of mine. I've learned a lot from what Cascade Engineering has done and really paved the way for on a lot of the thinking. But they were doing it all within one company. And I just realized that I wasn't big enough and didn't have the resources to do it in just my company. And so I really needed to build a more collaborative model to do that. And so, I talk about, and again, I don't know. I guess it doesn't matter because the stories are in the book, but I talk about being on the roof of our building one day, looking around and realizing that where our plant is located, we're sort of on the edge of this very residential area of West Michigan and this very industrial area of West Michigan. And looking at all of the employers that were within a half a mile of my building, and then looking at all the residences that were also within a half a mile of my building, and thinking, man, if every one of these businesses has got to be suffering or experiencing the same kinds of issues that we are. And that really began a conversation. We intentionally went out and started talking to other employers just in our neighborhood, to their HR people, and saying, do you have these problems? Are you seeing these things? Is your workforce experiencing this? And what do you do about it? And it was, yes, we're experiencing it. Yes, we're concerned about it. And no, we don't have any resources or any idea what to do about it. So that was like, okay, we're not the only ones. People care about these issues. So what's next? And so that's sort of some of the early developmental parts of the source.
You talk about having mentors. Who are some of your mentors? And then how do you suggest people go about finding other mentors like you have to help them to build their businesses?
Yeah, so I've been part of peer groups. Now this really isn't in the source, but CEO peer groups. I have some good friends that are willing to challenge me, and I think that it's one thing to have somebody who you can go and talk to, that just always makes you feel good. Like, oh, it's okay. You're really great at what you do and you'll figure it out. And there's and those people they're nice to be around, but they're not super helpful if you really need to solve something. Like, have you thought about this? Or here's a good book, or I've got somebody you need to talk to, or, you should try, being more disciplined about that. Or so, the people that are sort of mentors are ones that really challenge me to some next level of thinking.
Nice. Yeah, you want that friend to push back on you a little bit and definitely ruffle your feathers, right?
Right.
Awesome. Well, I want to encourage everyone watching, if you have any questions about the source or just for Mark in general, please drop them in the Q&A or in the chat. I'm happy to ask them for you. Mark, when you were writing this book, and maybe just in your experience of developing the program, what was some of the research you had to do to create that and to write this book?
Well, that's a good question too. And it's almost like two different questions. In all honesty, the research around the source was, and if there's any other entrepreneurs listening right now, they're going to totally understand what I'm going to say, is we didn't do any research. We just did it. We just started doing it. And it was like the mistakes, or, it was like daily learning. I mean, it was like, oh, well, let's try a different way. And so, when we first started, and I think I talked about the first sort of meeting, I think we had 16 companies that Fred Keller helped me convene the original 16 companies, and we did this ask. And we basically asked them for $500 a month for 12 months. And one of the guys says, well, how'd you come up with that number? And I said, I'll admit it's the most unfair way possible. I know that every person sitting in this room can afford $500 a month for 12 months to see if this will work. And Fred afterwards was like, you could be a little more not so direct, and we got half of them to sign up originally. So it wasn't, it wasn't like 100% close rate or anything like that, but it was enough. And we had some matching funds from the, not the Grand Rapids Community Foundation. Oh shoot, that's in the book too. We had some matching grant funds to get us started. So that gave us our first year budget, and we hired an executive director and Andrew Brower, and literally he and I were just sort of making it up as we went, and we knew what we wanted to do. We knew we wanted to link people, member companies, employees, to services in the community that would really help stabilize their lives. And Andrew was just tireless as our first executive director in pulling it all together. So very sort of entrepreneurial in the way we went about starting it. In terms of research for the book, I did want to have some research in the book because I didn't want it to just be completely my source. So there's some statistics that we cite in the book. There's some references for other organizations around the country, because there are now adaptations all over the country. So there's some resources. And I think that's one of the goals in going out and promoting the book, is to continue to provide resources for people around the country that want to start doing something similar.
Wonderful. I do have 2 audience questions for you.
Okay.
So this one is from Nate Vanderstelt. Hi, Nate. What are maybe 2 key questions that you encourage business owners to personally, courageously ask if they've never engaged in this level of thinking or practice before?
2 courageous questions. I think one is we often, and so from a business owner perspective, we often are in presentations where we look at data. It might be like skill gap data, or I think there was a recent headline that 40% of Americans would not be able to deal with a $400 surprise in their monthly budget. Or roughly 40% of Americans live below the Alice poverty rate. And we tend to look at those statistics in a non-personal way. So I think the courageous question would be, do I really believe that my workforce is exempt from those statistics? Because if those statistics are in any way accurate, the answer to that question is no. It can't be the case that I'm somehow exempt. Therefore, 40% of my workforce, people I know that come to work for me every day, are in those statistics. So what am I doing in my own house, if you will, to change the system and outcomes that I am concerned about? So I think that would be a courageous question that I would challenge people to ask. I think the other one that's kind of interesting to me, and it's maybe not directly for your own workforce, but I was also involved in another conversation recently where they were asking a group of, I don't think it was business owners, but relatively well-off individuals. And they were asking them if they knew anybody that was in this like Alice threshold, below the Alice threshold. And they said, no, we don't know any people like that. And I was like, that's not true, because we all do, right? It's the service people we run into. It's the really nice server you like at a restaurant, who's you just can't believe that person who's so nice is probably has this really complex life that they go home to. And this idea that somehow this statistical world doesn't touch some of us it's just not reality. So I think it's, if you're in a position where you're running a business, I think it's look inside, challenge yourself as, how are you part of this system? And then, just as you go through your life in the world, who are the people that you're running into? And what don't you maybe understand about their lives? So those would be my two courageous questions.
I think those were brilliant. And Lisa says that's a powerful thought prompt. I absolutely agree. I think putting the empathy back in business is, I think, the least anyone can do. I think that's brilliant. So we actually have a question from Lisa. Clearly change can be affected at the CEO level, but how can those who may not be at that level of leadership nudge their businesses or community organizations toward considering the source as a model of business? And also, what is your hope for larger corporations and this as a potential model for impact as well?
Well, those are a couple big questions. Thank you, Lisa. So what was the first part of the question, Samantha? I'm sorry.
Sure. How can those who may not be at the level of leadership of CEO nudge their business or community organizations towards considering the source as a model for business?
Yeah. So that's a tough question. And I wish I could just give you this like really prescriptive answer, but it's, I think the unfortunate, I guess, reality is that, and we've had a hard time overcoming it, which is everybody always wants to know, well, how is it going to benefit my company? Why should I do this? And if there's not some sort of an inherent interest in having people in your organization be successful, there's always this dynamic, right, between management and non-management. It's like, and I remember this cartoon from a long time ago, and it's a conversation between a CFO and a CEO, and the CFO says, well, what if we pay to train all these people and they leave? And the CEO says, well, what if we don't train them and they stay? Because sometimes it's hard to measure the cost that doesn't happen. And the cost of people in our organizations who are in crisis and having them not be engaged is probably much higher than we realize. And I think part of the evidence for that is when you get a lot of manufacturers who are great at lean manufacturing, and they know how to wring cost out of about any kind of system. And then you ask them what their cost of turnover is, and they have no idea. And when you run the numbers on your cost of turnover, they are so high that you can't believe them. And so it's like they think the cost can't be that much because it's just always been part of doing business. So I think that part of it would be looking at, like, say, the source website, which is grsource.org, and they've got some statistics on their website about, like, the return on investment. So we've got some metrics with the source. So if you need sort of an argument to convince a CEO or CFO or a head of HR or something that this might be something that they should look at, the source website alone has got some interesting statistics, and certainly also a network of people that would be willing to talk to anybody who's interested and help them sell the idea upstream if they need that kind of help. And I certainly would be available for those conversations too. So it's not always an easy conversation though, and I wish it were. So I'll give you one more argument. One more argument for it is, so Butterball Farms pays between $45,000 and $50,000 to be a member of the source a year. And for that amount of money, I could not hire one HR superstar. So I get the equivalent of an HR superstar for a fraction of what it would cost me if I could even find somebody that would be able to holistically address the range of problems that my workforce faces. And that alone, I think, is a pretty strong argument for why you should do something like this. And then what was the second half?
Yeah, the second part of the question was, what is your hope for larger corporations? And this is a potential model for impact with them as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to highlight two of the source member companies. One is Herman Miller and one is Spectrum Health. Large employers that have decided to get involved. Herman Miller's story, we actually have a little bit of that in the book. But they're seen as one of the premier employers in the country. And you would think, why is Herman Miller signing up to be part of the source? But what they discovered in some of their employee surveys was that there were these things that happened in people's lives, whether it was childcare, transportation, financial literacy. And again, there's lots and lots of things that people come across that their benefits plan just didn't address. And their EAP plan wasn't holistic enough to really address those issues either. And also didn't respond fast enough. When people have crises like that, they don't need a solution in 6 weeks. They need it like in 6 to 48 hours. And so the source really was able to come in and take care of some of those other kinds of situations that people have in their lives that Herman Miller's fantastic suite of benefits didn't address.
That's awesome that they were able to recognize that. That's awesome. We have a question from Jeff Poole. Hi, Jeff. It says, Mark, congratulations on the book. What advice would you give to young sorry, someone just started writing as I was reading. Young generation, second generation owners as they begin to run their family's business?
Jeff. Hi, Jeff. Man, as I went out and did some speaking on family business and family business transition, I think my biggest learning, and certainly was true in my family, was the lack of communication between first and second generation. There's usually, if you work some of that out between first and second generation. So if you're second generation, I think trying to either find somebody to help facilitate communication between yourself and first generation leadership, to see if you can drive conversation around, if it's a founder, like, what's your hope for this business? Where do you want it to go, and how do you want it to be run? And sometimes that's hard to do. So sometimes having a facilitator to do that is helpful. I think if you've successfully gotten to the second generation, what's the old expression, rags to riches and back again in 3 generations or something like that. I think the question of legacy starts to come up more. And I mean, I'm second generation, so I certainly can speak to that. And trying to protect, for me, it's trying to protect the mission of the business so that it can operate for a long time into the future and act as a vehicle to help people be successful and to provide opportunity. But families may have different missions, different reasons to be in an enterprise. But I think the second generation has an opportunity to really take that first generation business and build on it, and then set it up to run long term if that's what the family's goals are. But I think second generation has a pretty unique opportunity to really have influence of whether that business is going to go long term or if it's really only going to go to the third generation. Find some mentors, get some good mentors. And so Jeff, you know this. I mean, if you're in West Michigan, there are some really great people in this town, and they are generous with their time. And you just have to knock on some doors, and you will find people who will walk next to you, which is a great thing about West Michigan.
Awesome. So, who was this book written for? Who was your audience when you started putting pen to paper?
My writer asked me that all the time. She's like, okay, who's your target audience? And we went back and forth about that a lot. And so we decided to launch it as a leadership book because I really wanted to focus on the small to mid-market company. The company that I think can make these decisions without a lot of corporate interference necessarily, but also companies where the principal owners know the people that work for them, and maybe really feel this responsibility or this need to do more or to be more helpful with their workforce, but just they don't have the resources, they don't know how to go about it. But it's something that they sort of always carry around with them. Like, God, I wish I could do something about that. Or, Frank came into my office today and he had, this stuff going on at home, and I, tried to help him out. But, it's like, we have a model now. We've been doing this for almost 20 years. It's possible, but you can't do it alone. Like, go find some other business owners who share that perspective and get together, because together you absolutely can do that stuff, and you can do it really well. And that's really the audience that I'm looking to get to.
Great. We have a question from Michelle McDonald. Hi, Michelle. this is Michelle McDonald from Alternative Directions here in Grand Rapids. I'm familiar with the source and I think it's a great organization. Do you allow nonprofit organizations to join? Is there a minimum number of employees an organization must have in order to join the source?
That's a great question, Michelle. I don't. When we originally organized, we organized under Goodwill's 501c3. And the source is a nonprofit itself. I don't think there would be any reason a nonprofit couldn't join the source. They would run some of the analytics for you in terms of number of employees, and we don't have a minimum number. I don't know that there'd be any reason not to.
You gave the grsource.org website. Is there contact information on there and everything so we can send people over there too?
Yes. Yep. There's a contact page and there's a phone number and there's an email form.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee. It's one thing for a company or organizational owner leader to understand and deeply value the principles of the source, but difficult is it to infuse, but how difficult is it to infuse the source DNA model into management and employees at large? And what is the realistic timeline to effectively on-ramp everyone?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that, that varies by organization for sure. It does ebb and flow with different people that come in and out of your management team. We've had periods of time where the source isn't promoted within our company as well as it should be. And so we've had to sort of re-engage and like with any effort, there's got to be some, discipline and consistency over time to support it and to promote it. I will say that once you join the source, they do a pretty good job of getting on site and getting in touch with your employees. And part of it is just your internal marketing. Like, how do you talk about it with your team leaders or your plant managers? And is it a resource for them? And if they can see it as a resource for them to help the people that are working for them, and they don't feel like then they have to be the one that's like the problem solver for everybody, that can be really empowering for frontline and plant level managers. I would love to say this is super easy and that as soon as you introduce it to everybody, they get it. It hasn't been. I mean, I've been working at this for 20 years and which is part of the reason I wrote the book, because I want to have more conversations like this with more people. And hopefully get more people doing it. But it's not easy. It's not an easy, and it's a long game. If you're looking for next quarter results, this isn't the way to get them. This is the way to get results over time, and to help people be successful in their lives over time. So
I think some of the best company growth is slow and steady, right? And that I feel like this is a piece of that. I think that's very true. Let's wrap up questions. You mentioned before we even got on that you were working on a second book.
I am working on a second book.
Do you want to mention? Do you want to throw a teaser in there, and when can that be expected?
So, somebody asked me. Actually, it was probably my writer asked me, like, what's one of the most influential books you've ever read? And I said, it's the fifth discipline by Peter Senge. And I said, if I would love to actually meet Peter Senge someday, I mean, that's one of my lifetime goals. But this book is on like systems thinking. And so if one of the outcomes of the source is to prove that employers can in fact collaborate around some of these things in a really productive way, the next thing I'm trying to prove is that we're all part of a talent pipeline or a talent system. And we tend to think and talk about talent in a really destructive way. So, we talk about poaching people, and we have headhunters, and we want to retain all of our people. Well, retaining people and helping them be successful might be completely opposed goals. So, what if as employers, we could look at being part of a talent system, which means somebody might only work for us for 2 to 5 years. And if we don't have the next job, we gladly help them find the next job, even if it's in a different company. Now, that's a really hard thing to talk to employers about in today's labor market. But if we could figure that flow out and we could provide education along with employment simultaneously, we could build some interesting talent systems in this country. And a lot of the policy folks and government, nonprofit, I've said this in other forums, but businesses, we always get asked for money. People come to us and they're like, oh, will you support this effort? Will you support that effort? But they don't ever ask us to come engage with them strategically about solving the problem. And in our economy, businesses usually get paid because they've solved some sort of a problem. They've got a better service, a better product, they're addressing a market need somewhere. So the fact that we haven't been invited to be part of the design solution for some of the talent issues in our economy is rather interesting. And I think by again, so book number 2 is to challenge employers to think about being part of a talent system and asking for a seat at the design table. It's going to be a lot more work than the first one was, because it's not just my personal story.
Yeah. Do you have a timeline for that one or no?
We're probably 18 months out yet. So.
Awesome. Yeah, I like the idea of, I heard this mentioned once at a conference, the idea of a 365-degree partnership between a business and a nonprofit or what have you, where it's not just the money given, but time put in to make the organization better. So I like that a lot.
Right.
So you mentioned the fifth discipline.
Yes.
Are there any other books that you would recommend people go out and grab?
Oh my word.
Not to put you on the spot.
I have lots of books that I like to read. In terms of business books, Good to Great, Built to Last. Built to Last was a great book. I'm trying to think of maybe some more recent ones, and there's some of like the blocking and tackling books, like my 2 favorite books on negotiation. One is Getting to Yes, and the other is Start with No.
What's on your bedside table? Are you reading anything right now?
You know what? I was just given a book that I'm going to start tomorrow called Conscious Capitalism. I just put it in my brief. Yeah, Conscious Capitalism. So I don't know. It's highly recommended. So I'm looking forward to reading that.
Awesome. That's a really great reading list.
So another fun one, just for those of us who also are a little cynical sometimes, is Dilbert's Management Principles. It's an absolutely brilliant book, and it's really good at poking fun of a lot of stuff that we do in management that we probably ought to rethink.
That's awesome. No, I appreciate it. I appreciate your time and coming out this evening and just chatting with me. Thank you, everyone watching. This has been really great. So don't forget to pick up your copy of The Source through Schuler Books. We have copies coming. You can place your order now. It'll be a special order and it'll come to you when they get in. Thank you, Mark, for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Samantha. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm super happy that literally my first book event is being hosted by Schuler's, a local bookseller, which I absolutely love.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. If you joined us late, this will go up on our YouTube channel either tomorrow or early next week. You can also watch for that on our social media. All right. Thanks. Have a good night, Mark.
All right. Good night, Samantha. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.